We all know that we're in a very intense time. This is a very intense season. And yet God knew that this was coming. God knew what was ahead of us. He knows what's coming. And so He knows where we're at. He knows where we're at in our faith. He knows where we're at in our relationship with Him. And so what Paul is doing is Paul is writing this letter to Timothy. And Timothy, if you will, is his spiritual son. Paul is the spiritual father in the figure. And so he's come along and he's spent time discipling Timothy and taught him the ministry and spent years with him, raising him up to be a strong young man of God to lead. And so Paul is in prison. He's writing the letter from prison. This is his third prison term. He's still at it. He hasn't given up. And so he's serving his term. He's in prison. And he realizes that this might be the last one. He realizes that death is imminent and that they are planning to execute him. That's what the Roman government has said is going to happen. So what he decides, I've got to do the most important things. And the first thing that I've got to do is I've got to write my spiritual son, and I've got to encourage him. He's not thinking about himself. He's not thinking about his last days. He's thinking about the legacy that is coming behind him. And so I think that's very critical for us as a body. What we need to realize is that as our world changes and as our season fades, we've got to pass that baton that Darlene was talking about earlier. The question that we need to be asking ourselves is not what is our country going to be like on Wednesday, but what is our country going to be like 10 years from now? Yeah. And so we have a very important responsibility in what we stand up for, what we value, what we fight for. And so Paul realizes this, and he's writing this letter with some urgency, with lots of emotion. You don't see that in all of his writings. But this one is very personal. This one is to his spiritual son. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to remind Timothy of some of the most important things. He's trying to give Timothy something that will last, right? So put yourself in this situation. If you had one final letter to write to your kids, one final letter to write to your adult children, one last word of encouragement for them, what would you say? What would you focus on? If for some reason you knew that life was coming to an end, what would you make preparation for? What would you do in those final hours? How would you handle this? And so this is what the Apostle Paul is doing, and he's putting these final words together for Timothy because he realizes that Timothy is going to need this understanding. And so the first thing we read in verse 1 is he says, I charge you. Hear the intensity. This is like a military term. Pay attention. This is one of those moments. This is that very intense moment when he says, hear me. Hear me. Understand me. Pay attention to what I'm saying to you. Catch this. Let it get down on the inside of you. Don't daydream when I'm talking to you like this. Don't start drifting away to something else. Capture this moment. And so there's an urgency in this moment. And so he tells them the three basic things, three warnings. First, the warning is about false teachers and false doctrines. He says this, he says, as things unfold, I'm probably not going to be here to see it, but as things unfold, what's going to happen is that there's going to be all kinds of people preaching and all kinds of people teaching, and they are not going to be preaching the truth. Is that relevant to us right now? Yes. Would you say that most churches, most pastors, most teachers, most influencers, most podcast people, most, internet prophets, do you think they're preaching the truth? I'll tell you two things about them. Most of them are not preaching the truth, and most of them are not discipling anybody. They're spending time putting together messages. They're spending time putting together things so that they can get followers. Not followers as in people they disciple, but people that help them gain influence so that they can get more money for what they do. At the end of the day, many of the people who are on the internet doing what they're doing it not for the people they're doing it to, they're doing it for themselves. This is who Paul's talking about. This is what he's saying. What he's saying is look at the motivation behind the preaching. What's the game? What's the goal? What are they after? They're after something for themselves. And listen, we can all whip up a message that will appeal to the masses. We can all stand in front of a camera and other things of that nature and get people to start following us. Just get a cat in the background with you and it will really help. There are certain people that will look at pictures of cats for some reason all day long. They love them. Strange, right? Paul's telling Timothy, you got to preach the truth. See, he's telling him, he's saying, look, this is an urgent moment. Don't lose sight of the calling that God has on your life. Remember, false teachers will come, false doctrines will rise, but they will never stick around very long. Why? Because eventually people find out that they're false. It's like the guy that used to travel around on the wagon and said he had a potion to heal all your ails and illnesses and sicknesses, right? Eventually they realized when it didn't work, he got ran out of town. And that's what we're going to find with a lot of these people, is that they will not be able to weather the seasons. And so he says to him, you got to be in season and out of season. What does that mean? You got to be able to last. You got to be able to stay with this thing. You got to be a person that has this ability to endure, right? How many of us can relate to that? You got to endure some things. You got to get through some things. You got to have some toughness inside you, right? So, Paul said to Timothy, let's go over to chapter 1. I want you to see this. In chapter 1, verse 6 and 7 of 2 Timothy, he says, therefore I remind you to stir up the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. So Paul had this encounter with Timothy, right? He had this encounter with Timothy. When he had this encounter, he laid his hands on him. And when he laid his hands on him, there was an impartation of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit imparted this gift to Timothy. This gift caused a boldness and a courage inside of Timothy and caused him to be this fearless evangelist. Isn't that powerful? You see what happened here. And so he's got the gift down on the inside of him. But what he's saying is that understand this, that the competition to your gift will be fear. Right? So how many times have we had the encounter with God? God has touched us. God has done something deep inside of us. He's ministered to us. And then we lose it because of fear. We lose it because of insecurity. We forget who we are. We forget what He gave us. We forget what He imparted to us because we get going down the road and fear jumps up and it takes it from us. So He's trying to remind him. He's trying to say, listen, you were born for a purpose. You have something. God has given you something. You have a message down on the inside of you. He says you have a sound mind. Wow, that's very important. A sound mind. He's speaking to where Timothy could be if he stays in the right relationship with the Lord. Now, some days, all of us would say, probably we don't think we have a very sound mind. Like, where is my mind? And where am I? And what was I doing? Right? It can mess with you. Right? You get a little lost sometimes. And why did I drive all the way over here? I knew I was coming to get something. All right. So we have these moments. We have these times. But those times don't define us. They don't define who we really are. They don't define us. And he said, what you need to understand that this sound mind, this power, this love that comes with the gift is all wrapped up in your relationship with the Lord. When you know Him, you're going to know who you are, which is going to give you the power to do the things He's called you to do. Is all that making sense? Yes. And so he's having this moment with Timothy, and he's saying, listen, I want you to go back to that place where that impartation happened and stir it up. Stir it up. Funny experience happened to Darlene and I when we were very young and working for the church in Tulsa, and we had a music program at this church that was next level. And so I would say 60% of the congregation was African American, and then, blended congregation, but we had the best, if you will, Pentecostal sound. I mean, it was rocking every week, right? And so at offering time, our pastor had a philosophy. He wanted people to be happy because he felt like if they were happy, they would give more. Okay? And so the choir, which was, 70, 80 voices, and all of these guys had made, they were just amazing. And so we got the full band and everything. So they did this song called Stir Up the Gift. And they had signals, like signals and hand motions, and they would give the stir up the gift, stir up the gift. And you would just be like, yeah, where's my ball at? Give it time, And so, you get to know people who sit around you, right? And so this new couple sits behind us, very professional, white people. And they were like just, sort of enamored by the church and loving the energy of the pastor and all these things. And he says to me one day, he says, man, we can't believe how bold that pastor is. I said, what do you mean? He says, when it's offering time, they play that song. Shut up and give. Shut up and give. I never heard a church tell us that before. I just got my wallet out and started giving right away. Not that gift. See, a lot of times what we're thinking is that if it was given to us, it can be taken away. And so what the Lord does is He gives the gift, and then He gives the grace for the gift to grow and multiply. You can tell when the gift is working in your life because not only does it bless you, but it blesses others. And so the gift comes alive. It multiplies. It has something inside of it that you can give to other people. And so this morning, I want to remind you has given you something for this generation, for this hour. God has put something inside of you that you have for this world right now. And we all can benefit from one another's gifts.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so when we put our gifts together, it becomes even stronger and more powerful, and we have more to offer to one another.
Yes.
Can you see this?
Yes.
And so what I want to remind you of this morning is for some reason, have you lost sight of the fact that God gave you something? He gave you a gift. He gave you something at some point in your life. Have you lost that? And if you've lost that, the Lord wants to remind you that He needs you to utilize that gift for this season and for this time. And I'd like to say to you as your pastor, as someone serving you, I'd like to see that gift multiplied through your life. As a matter of fact, I love to see these gifts come alive and the Lord causing things to happen in your life. I love to hear the testimonies. It's really beautiful when it happens. The other thing that he approaches here in talking with Timothy about is suffering and perseverance. Paul realizes, given the circumstances and the culture of the day, for the first 300 years of the early church, they were under tremendous persecution. Their lives were on the line. They could be killed for their beliefs because the Roman Empire was okay with any and all religions as long as it didn't threaten their rulership. Right? And so if somebody had a religion or a religious practice in some way that threatened the leadership of Rome, then they were all about oppressing those people and most of the time executing them. And so this is why Paul keeps getting thrown in prison, because the Judaizers, which were Jews, keep telling Rome that this guy is trouble. And so on every occasion, it's his brothers who are ratting him out to the government, and the government throws him in prison. And so this final time, they've basically said, here he goes again. He's stirring up all this trouble, because when Paul and these other traveling evangelists would go into these places, things would happen that would upset the culture. Like when people start burning their idols, their books and writings and everything else, when they have a public fire and they no longer need those idols, then that creates a little bit of a problem for the culture, for the government. And they're like, oh, we don't want all of that. We need that to go away. And so here's Paul. Paul's telling Timothy, he's saying, listen, you got to do this like a good soldier. You got to know that God is with you, that He's going to be with you. He's going to see you through these times. Isn't it interesting that Paul would encourage him to stay strong when Paul in his own mind knows that his life is near the end? Yeah. Isn't that amazing? That he can encourage someone from that position. You would almost think he would be saying the opposite. How is it that somebody who's about to be martyred could have such confidence? Where did that come from? Where did he get that confidence? Where did he get the confidence and the strength to look at this young minister and tell him that no matter what kind of persecution you go through, it's worth it? I'm going to tell you where he got it. He got it when he was shipwrecked. He got it when he was pulled into the public square and beaten. He got it when the people that he thought were joining his ministry and walking with him and saying they were going to be brothers and supporters betrayed him. That's where he got it. He got it when he stood up in public and the crowds rushed him. He got it when they told him that they were coming to get him, to kill him, and the prison split in half because an earthquake came And he knew that that was the hand of God. And they actually stayed and waited so that he could take care of the jailer so he didn't get killed. That's where he got it. He got this unquenchable confidence and fire from God every time he took a step of faith, every time he went where God called him to go, every time he said, I know they're waiting for me when I get there. You imagine what it would be like? Imagine what it would be like to walk out your door tomorrow morning and know that there's a crowd of people gathered to where you're going that want to destroy you. Isn't that interesting? We live in that time. We see this right now with President Trump. I mean, he has a lot of people who love him. But there are a lot of people who don't want him here. It's real. We've seen at least 2 assassination attempts within the last several months. That's real. You know, think about this. We live in a world where it's okay for certain people to plan to destroy other people for political causes. It's no different for Paul's time than it is in our time. That's the world that we now live in. And there's a group of people that will send you hate mail. And they will get involved in threatening you and threatening your family and making your life miserable. And we think to ourselves, hey, this is only for people who are involved in politics. I beg to differ. I beg to differ. I know of ministers and people who have put their lives on the line just for preaching the gospel, who've had their lives threatened on many occasions. I played for you a video one morning here of a guy who was a pastor in Canada that he spent a ton of time in prison and other places just because he wanted to keep his church going during COVID. Right. Che-On in San Francisco did the same thing. He ended up getting into a lawsuit with the state, and they tried to fine everybody that was going to the church $1,000 a Sunday. Would you pay $1,000 to come to church on Sunday?
Why not?
Would you? If you would, let's take the offering back. But this is where we're at. This is where we're at. Remember 2020.
Yeah.
Remember it?
Yes.
Remember how miserable it was? Remember what was going on? Remember all the stuff that they were putting on us?
Yes.
That was intense, right? And so this is where we live right now. And listen, as we go and as we continue down this road, religious freedom in this country becomes a much more difficult thing. I know I'm out there on the street. I see what people say. I hear what they say to me. You know, I'm out there doing things because I believe that right now the church needs to be out there as much as we're in here. Amen. All right. So the third thing, he says, you got to be faithful to your ministry. So there's going to be false teachers. You're going to go through suffering, and then you got to be faithful to the ministry. What is he saying? He's trying to help Timothy understand that this faithfulness that we are called to. I do ministry because I'm called, not just because I get paid to do it, or not just because I have followers or people who are along with me. I do this because I'm called. And that's what he's trying to tell Timothy. You got to take away all of the other external reasons for why you do something. And at the end of the day, it's got to be because you know God has given you that assignment. Because otherwise, we'll come up with all kinds of excuses when it gets hard. Right? It's real easy to do it when things are going well. And in my experience in the 4 years since we started this church, is that things go well about 20% of the time. And it's usually like when I'm away. So here's the reality. He says to him, if we go down to verse 6, he says, "For I am already poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight, and I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." And so when you get into that language there, what he's saying to Timothy is, keep your head up. Keep your head up. And so when I researched that phrase and I went back and I looked at, we use this phrase in our culture. Keep your head on, keep your hat on, keep your head up. It comes out of a military term. And so what would happen is as soldiers were being trained and they were being ready for battle, they were taught, keep your head up. Why? Because if your head is down, then you can't see what's going on out there, right? Which makes you a target. Which also means that if you're trying to gain ground, if you're shooting or doing something of that nature, you're not going to be a very good shot with your head down. If you're in a fight, hand-to-hand combat, what do you think is going to happen if your head's down? You're probably going to get hit in the head, right? You're probably going to lose the battle, right? So you got to keep your head up. And if there's one thing that I would say to us as we go through this week, we got to keep our head up no matter what. Keep your head up. And they used to tell me this when I played football, because when you go to tackle somebody, if your head is down, then you potentially could injure your spinal cord. And so what they used to say is, plant your nose on his chest and drive through him. Okay? And so you're thinking to yourself, why would you do that to your nose? Because you have a helmet on and a face mask. And neither your head nor your face get hurt. But what happens is that when you have two 200-pound plus men colliding, both of them running and moving as hard as they can, you hear this boom! And it's like, who won? The guy laying on his back. And so the whole goal was to get leverage, to get up under him so you could push him backwards. Right? You don't go into a tackle like this. All right, we're about to hit each other. Let's see what happens. Oh, no. No, you get yourself hurt that way. You actually win the battle if you go in harder than he does. Trust me, I found this out. It took me a little while. I was a slow learner, but I figured it out. If I hit him harder than he hits me, I get hurt less. This is what Paul's talking about. He's saying, listen, you got to fight these spiritual battles to win. He's not talking about losing. He's not talking about going in easy. He's talking about fighting. He's talking about a real fight, a fight that you and I fight every day. And that's an enemy that we have. And he's a real enemy. He's called the devil. He wants to destroy everyone in this room. He doesn't care if he does it slowly or quickly. He's coming for you. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's game's on. Put the helmet on. Let's go. I'm going to give him everything he gets. What I want to do is I want to raise up a generation of Timothys that understand how to fight this fight, that are going to outlive me, that are going to keep this kingdom and trust this word and continue to propagate the gospel all over this world. That's what I want to do. So So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's running this country, we are on fire for Jesus no matter what.
Right.
Now, I will say, if we have certain people in office, it will make it easier for us. The truth of the matter is, he said, listen, there's a fight. And you don't get to avoid this fight. Sorry. You don't get to not fight. You either fight or you get taken. And that's the reality. Now, there's such a way that we fight that we learn how to win. How many of you grew up in a household you had an older brother? I had two older brothers, both pretty tough guys and things of that nature. And I can remember one of these little backyard skirmishes that I was in with someone. And I can remember when my older brother came around the corner of the house. And I was in this little skirmish with this little kid. Now, listen, back in the day, these were just, 2 seconds, it was over, right? But all that fear that you have in your head about what's about to happen, And so usually what gets you really revving is all the other kids, when the other kid offends your mom or whatever, and everybody else goes, ooh, right? And they entice this little skirmish, right? It's about to happen. I'm about to get into a little scrap here. But when my big brother walked around the corner and this guy didn't see him, and my brother was standing behind him, and my brother's shadow came over him, I was like, I'm about to win. Right? And so when we know that we are about to win, we fight altogether differently.
Yes.
Let me inform you this morning, we are in a fixed fight.
Yes.
We've already won. And every place that God has assigned us to take territory is already ours. And you have to understand that God is sending you into a place to win. Whether it's in the school, or whether it's in the government, or whether it's in the marketplace, or wherever your assignment is in this hour, God has planted you there because He wants you to win. He wants you to take a position of knowing that you have within you the King of all kings, who's going to empower you to fulfill your purpose, which is going to cause that environment to be filled with the reality of Christ living through you.
Yes.
You're on assignment.
Yes.
And you're on assignment to win. It's so important. And the other metaphor that he appeals to is the race. The race. Right? He says, I've fought the fight. I've finished the race. Right? So what race is he talking about? We all have this race. We all have this race that we're in. And so it's a race to fulfill purpose, your destiny. And so the goal here is not necessarily to be the first one across the line like it typically is, like if you're at the Olympics or something of that nature. The goal here is to see who can you get to cross the line with you. It totally changes. It changes when you understand that the goal of this race is for you to understand who you are and to bring others along with you so that you get them to finish with you.
Yes.
The Apostle Paul is trying to tell Timothy this. He's trying to say, listen, according to the Proverbs, it's not about the swiftest, the fastest, the strongest, but it's about he who endures to the end.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's what it's about. We've got to understand something here. That we are in this race together. We are running this race. We are in this place, and it's not about me getting ahead of you, but it's about me helping you come up so that you can run your race and help the people around us run their race. And then before it's over with, we've all crossed that finish line. And as we cross, others can cross ahead of us.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? You have to understand this. Your children and your grandchildren and all the people that come after you are running on the same path that you're on. What you do and don't do will affect how far they are able to go. That's so important for us to see. When they have to start over and find their own place, it's a lot harder for them. Both Darlene and I came from families that they weren't Christian families. There was a lot of problems. And so what we do is we put our kids in this handicapped position because they have to learn so much. But when you have that heritage and you know that the people coming behind you are following you, and this is so powerful when they can run your path. That's what Paul's saying to Timothy. Just run on the path that I've been on. This is why it's so important that we understand who our spiritual leaders are. Because we want to run on the path that they're on. If they're not getting anywhere, they're just running in circles, what do we got going on? Have you ever heard that definition of a dysfunctional family? Have you heard that of a bunch of people out in the ocean? They're in this boat together. They're all on one side of the boat. The boat keeps going in a circle. They're like, we're not getting anywhere. This is rough. One of them says, I think I want to go to the other side. And they're all afraid. Don't you go over there, now the boat rocks. Well, we're getting somewhere. See? And what has to happen is somebody's got to go over there to bring balance to the boat. Somebody's got to stop doing what we've all been doing all these years. And that someone might be you. That's what I was in my family. I said, not only am I going to the other side, I want out the boat. Say, y'all can stay out there the rest of your life. Got my own little dinghy. I'm going. Now, the confidence that we are called to walk in this hour is knowing that we are winning this race. And no matter what happens on Tuesday, we have to handle that moment the right way. We have to handle that moment with integrity, with dignity and honor. We have to handle that moment as people who know who they are. Okay? And so what we want to promote is to do things the honorable way, no matter what happens. Now, if there are things that happen that shouldn't happen, we should stand up and help do something about that. But whatever we do needs to honor Jesus. It needs to honor his character. It needs to honor who he is. And we need to be careful how we represent him. Does that make sense? And so what we want in this stage, in this moment, is we want to know who we are. And we want to step into it with confidence, knowing that God is with us. Because he is. Isn't that powerful? So, I believe that what we're going to see in the coming days is a really important shift in our country. And no matter what happens, whether Trump wins or whether Harris wins, we have a lot of work to do come Wednesday. Right? Either way. Please stand to your feet. Would you guys?